I'm going to ask you to do a little bit of work, okay? You're going to have to be creative. I'm going to ask you to come up with the idea for a book or a movie or a video game. And it can be whatever you want, except there needs to be a few stipulations. It has to have a desert as the main theme. There needs to be no cowboys, though, so Western fans are out. And a shark needs to appear at least once through the duration of it. That's all the direction I'll give. So think about that. Imagine making this beginning to end. Now, imagine making this entire thing in just 2 days, start to finish. Now that might be a little terrifying, or some of you might even think that's impossible. But what if I told you that there are thousands of people doing that right now? See, as mentioned, I come from the independent game industry, and a common practice is to hold something known as a game jam. Now, a game jam is basically kind of what we just did. It's a set of rules and stipulations given to programmers, artists, sound engineers to make an entire game, usually between 24 to 72 hours from start to finish. And some of the stuff that they make is just beautiful. A lot of the games that they make turn into full-fledged projects or even springboard a lot of the companies that start from these game jams. And the teams or the individuals that do well understand the sole concept that game jams are trying to promote, which is that true creative freedom only exists within constraints. Now, I've been lucky enough to be able to do what I love for about 13 years. And if you're observant, you'll notice that I don't look that old. And that's very nice of you to notice. I started making games when I was 8 years old, sitting on the computer, spending my time mostly indoors. And it's not that I didn't want to go outside and play with the other kids. It's just that I was one of those kids. I thought basically the same way, except shorter and a little fatter. So let me illustrate. I remember a time in elementary school where my teacher told me to write a one-page essay. And I must have found the topic so incredibly interesting because what turned from a one-page essay became 4 whole pages of data relating to my topic. And instead of receiving the accolades that I expected from my teacher, she gave it back to me, marking an entire letter grade down for each additional page and asking me for a rewrite. Now, I loved my topic, but I didn't want to disappoint my teacher. So what I did is I took my paper and got 4 more additional pages, rewrote the whole thing word for word on those 4 pages. But I didn't turn that in, because this time I learned. I took all 4 pages and taped them top to bottom to make just one big scroll, technically meeting the requirements of a one-page paper. And I could tell all the teachers in the audience are probably just looking at me with the most hate. So I'm sure we all remember a time where we skirted the rules out of a technicality. And I generally regard this point in my life as one of the most creative things that I've ever done, which is a little odd because creative individuals, we usually tend to focus on the tangible or the primarily artistic things that we've done in the past. However, that is a bit of an oversimplification of what creativity is. Creativity isn't necessarily imposing one's will on a canvas or a movie screen. It's more problem solving. Now, we marvel at Leonardo da Vinci's flying machines for their fabulous designs, but we usually tend to forget that they are just the byproducts of the solution that the creator saw as the problem of flight. Now, the knowledge of flight and the physics of it didn't exist at the time, and so he saw the way the designs look are just solely from his calculations and his problem solving. Now, he didn't look at the limited information at the time as a blockade. In fact, you usually find that creative individuals look at constraints and limitations as springboards or ways to hone their creative abilities. And we could use those as well in just our regular everyday problem solving or in any of our creative endeavors. So, what are constraints, or what are they, and how can we use them? Well, I will tell you, audience. One major constraint, well, there are tons of constraints, and an artist doesn't have the same constraints that a businessman will have. But there are a few that are overarching in all of our domains. One common constraint is time. Now, In our business-related modern day, we find that we have people that we need to answer to. We have bosses, we have clients, but some of us sole entrepreneurs or sole proprietors don't have that. And it's harder to realize, even though that there's that lack of stress, we don't have enough pressure to cause us to create anything. See, let me explain. The first game jam that I actually participated in was a 3-day game jam. And at the time, I was a little more inexperienced with game design. So for the first day, I did what seemed logical. I spent my entire day working on the base physics and the mechanics of the game, which is basically like building the engine of a car. Your game can't run without them. And then, so after that, I had 2 full days, and I thought, I'm good. I'll just add everything else. I'll add the stuff that'll make it look pretty. Which is a big no-no, because it's in essence taking your engine, giving it a paint job, and just throwing stickers at it. You have an engine that works, but it's not a car. Now, I used my first day pretty well, but because I perceived that I had more time than I actually had, I didn't do any problem solving. Now, what you come to find is enough time to get things done is important, but too much causes us to be complacent and add things that are not unnecessary to our creative problem solving. Now, a product of our time is technology. Another constraint that we have upon us is the technological constraints. Technology is growing so quickly that technology is going so quickly that today we have more creative potential in the palm of our hands than we did 30 years ago because of smartphones and the internet and program industry standards. Now, the thing about this is, because the solutions to our creative problems are so easy to find, more people are finding those solutions. And if everyone's finding those solutions, they're not really making anything new or creative. In fact, it might even be in our best benefit to go against the industry standard and go against the norm to find more creative solutions. By limiting our technology, we can actually find more creative solutions. And here's an example. Well, let's take a little-known game. It was made in 1985. You might not have heard of it. It's called Super Mario Bros. So, yeah, you know it. So Super Mario Bros. Is probably the most influential game today. And the Mario character is the most recognizable character in the world. And you don't even have to have heard or actually have played the game to know the main theme of Mario. You know, da-da-da-da. Yeah, you got it. We got some. Now, the composer Koji Kondo was very experienced with composition. He started making music on an electric organ when he was 5 years old and participated in many jazz bands and compositional projects. So imagine his surprise when he was approached by Nintendo, asked to make the music for a game, and told that he could only use 5 notes at a time. However, 3 of the notes were a little bit odd. One of them was a noise channel that had to be for a single drum noise. Another one was a low bass note. And the last one played short wave sounds that sounded like a guy screaming underwater into a tube. So no one really used that one. So realistically, that gave Koji 2 notes to work with to make a theme. Now, that's probably not enough for us to make a grand epic like Lord of the Rings. But instead of looking at the limitations and getting discouraged and saying, I'll just make something that works, and picking up his check, Koji looked at it as a way to create a song so simple and enduring that you'd be hard-pressed not to know it today. Now, another constraint that we have is what we know. It's pretty obvious that I can only create what I do know. I can't draw a picture of an elephant if I've never seen one or been described one. That's obvious. So it would stand to reason that we want to build our knowledge as vastly as possible so that we could draw from it to find more creative solutions. However, it doesn't matter how much you know if all you're doing is drawing directly from it. Like Charles Darwin in The Origin of Species he didn't do what the preconceived notions at the time were. In fact, we usually consider the origin of species to be rather evolutionary. Sorry, revolutionary. And going against all the common knowledge at the time. In fact, we should build our knowledge bases as widely as possible so that we could do the opposite of what we know, using our knowledge as a constraint to find more creative solutions. For example, we are working on a game currently where all the characters are police officers. Now, when designing these characters, what we first did is we went into our mental storage and took out what a police officer is. They have badges, they have uniforms, they have hats, and we designed our characters that way. And what we found when players were playing them is that it was really boring and they didn't like it at all. They've seen a police officer, they know what they look like, so why would they play something that they've already seen and that they're used to? So what we did is we took them back and we used the knowledge that we knew again. We know what police officers look like. They have uniforms and badges and hats. But we used that as a stipulation for what not to do. We made sure that none of the characters could have any of those things for their designs. And what we found is players more readily aligned themselves with them. They asked more about them. They want to know more about the characters, and they liked them a lot more. So when we're trying to find our creative solutions, it's best not to use what the past knowledge is and use something a little more different and novel. Now, considering that time is a bit of a constraint, I'll give one last thing about freedom. See, when we're trying to solve our creative problems, we need enough freedom and wiggle room to work around in. In fact, the University of Berkeley found that there's a special magic balance between freedom and constraints. Too many constraints will choke your creative freedom, but too few will allow it to fizzle out. So we need to find that perfect balance for us. Some of us need to be told exactly what to do, but some of us need more space to wonder about the what-ifs and the hypotheticals. Now, our creative processes will greatly be valued from using constraints. And if you don't feel enough pressure in your life, you just need to add more. Give yourself chains so you could break free from them. You've all been wonderful. Thank you.